Lieutenant Maya Vasquez had been told 3 times before they landed on Verath Prime that she was not to touch anything, smile at anything, or make eye contact with anything that had claws. She had nodded each time and meant it each time, and forgotten it each time, because that was just who she was. The shuttle came down through clouds that glowed faintly purple and orange, lit from beneath by forests that pulsed with living light, and Maya pressed her face to the viewport like a child seeing snow for the first time, while her colleague Tessic made a sound beside her that was somewhere between a whimper and a prayer. Tessic was Rilvani, which meant he was tall and insectoid and covered in delicate chitinous plates that clicked together when he was nervous. And right now, he sounded like a bag of coins being shaken down a staircase. "You are aware," he said in his thin, careful voice, "that the Karathi are the single most dangerous predatory species in the known compact." "I read the briefing," Maya said without looking away from the window. "You are aware that their venom can dissolve ship-grade alloy." "Tessic, I read the briefing. You are aware that they can see in total darkness, and their cubs have been known to kill creatures 4 times their size before they reach maturity." "Tessic, I simply want to ensure that you approach this cultural exchange with the appropriate level of terror," offered Durm from the seat behind them, and the whole shuttle creaked as he shifted his weight, because Durm was Gorvathi, which meant he was roughly the size and shape of a small armored vehicle with opinions about trade policy. "Respect," Tessic corrected stiffly. "I was going to say, respect." Maya finally turned from the window and gave them both the kind of warm, unbothered smile that had gotten her through first contact situations on 9 different worlds, and she tapped the wrist cam on her left arm. Out of habit, to make sure it was recording, because it was always recording, because she had learned a long time ago in the field that the most important moments were the ones you did not see coming. The shuttle landed, and the doors opened, and the air of Verath Prime hit them like warm breath, scented with something sweet and electric. And standing at the base of the landing pad, in full ceremonial armor, was Matriarch Seaith of Clan Seaith. And Maya understood immediately why every species in the galaxy treated the Karathi with such careful deference. Seaith stood 7 feet tall, and her fur was a deep black that rippled with streaks of blue and gold bioluminescence that moved like living fire across her body. And her eyes were the color of molten copper, and her claws were retracted, but the sheaths alone were the length of combat knives. And she moved with the kind of fluid stillness that belonged to a creature that had never once in its entire evolutionary history needed to be afraid of anything. She was beautiful and terrifying, and Maya liked her immediately. The formal welcome took 2 hours and involved a procession through the Hall of Lineages, which was the most sacred space in the clan hold. A vast corridor carved from living stone, with walls that breathed with shifting bioluminescent murals depicting 10,000 years of Karathi history, wars and hunts and births and deaths, all glowing softly in colors that had no names in any human language. Maya walked with her hands clasped behind her back, and her wrist cam quietly taking in everything, while Tessic clicked nervously beside her, and Durm tried very hard to make his massive frame look non-threatening, which was a bit like watching a tank try to seem polite. And then they reached the nursery viewing gallery. Maya felt the shift in the air before she understood it, a tension that ran through every Karathi guard like a current, and Seaith herself slowed her pace and turned to face the delegation with an expression that Maya's translator could not fully render, but that her gut understood as something close to, "I am trusting you with this, and if you betray that trust, I will end you so completely that your species will feel it." "You are being granted a rare honor," Seaith said in a voice like silk over gravel. "No non-Karathi delegation has been permitted near the nursery in 40 years, and you will observe from behind the barrier, and you will not approach, and you will not vocalize, and you will not make eye contact with the cubs. Tessic nodded so fast his headplates rattled. Derm grunted in solemn agreement. Maya said, "Of course," and meant it completely. The gallery overlooked a wide, sunken chamber, separated by a shimmer barrier that hummed faintly with energy. And below them, in a space filled with soft, glowing moss and warm light, were the cubs of Clan Seaith. And Maya felt her heart do something stupid and wonderful in her. There were 6 of them, tumbling over each other in a pile of oversized paws and flickering fur, making small, sharp sounds as they play-fought with a ferocity that would have been alarming if they were not also absurdly fluffy. And their eyes were enormous, and their ears were too big for their heads, and their tails whipped around like they had minds of their own. They were the most adorable things Maya had ever seen in her life, and she had to physically stop herself from making a sound. She bit her lip and watched, and her wrist cam recorded everything in steady silence. And then one of the cubs stopped playing. It was smaller than the others, with mottled silver-blue fur that pulsed with faint light, and it turned its head and looked directly up at the gallery, and its enormous amber eyes locked onto Maya, with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. Maya did not look away, because she had already forgotten the rules, and she smiled. Just a small smile, just a reflex, just the automatic human response to seeing something small and soft and alive. The cub chirped. It was a tiny sound, barely audible through the barrier, but every Karathi guard in the gallery went rigid, and Matriarch Seaith's claws extended half an inch from their sheaths with a soft metallic whisper. And Tessic grabbed Maya's arm with 3 of his 4 hands. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Then Seaith's claws retracted, and she said, "We move on," in a tone that allowed no discussion. And the delegation continued through the gallery, and the moment passed, and everyone pretended it had not happened. Everyone except Maya. That night in her quarters, she pulled up the wrist cam footage on her holo display and scrubbed through the nursery recording frame by frame, and what she saw made her sit very still for a very long time. The silver-blue cub had not just looked at her, entered the gallery, to the moment she left, its head turning in a slow, steady arc, its pupils fully dilated, its bioluminescent fur pulsing in a pattern that Maya cross-referenced with her xenobiology database and found listed under only 2 possible interpretations. The first was predatory fixation, which meant the cub had identified her as prey. The second was bonding imprint, which meant something else entirely, something that made Maya's breath catch and her hand drift unconsciously to the sleeve where the cub had been staring. She saved the footage and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep for a very long time. Maya woke to a sound she could not name. It was somewhere between a hum and a vibration, not quite a purr and not quite a growl, something that lived in the space between frequencies and buzzed against the bones of her chest like a second heartbeat, and it was coming from directly outside her door. She lay still for 3 seconds, which was about as long as her curiosity had ever allowed her to stay still about anything. And then she swung her legs off the sleeping platform and padded barefoot across the cool stone floor and pressed the door release. The silver-blue cub was sitting in the corridor. It looked up at her with those enormous amber eyes, and its fur pulsed once with a soft wave of light that traveled from its nose to the tip of its tail, and then it opened its mouth and made a sound that Maya would remember for the rest of her life. Fer fer fer. It was small and rhythmic and earnest, a sound made with the whole body, and the cub's tiny chest vibrated with each syllable, and its oversized paws kneaded the stone floor in time with the rhythm, like it was keeping a beat that only it could hear. Maya did not move, because some deep old part of her brain knew that this moment was fragile in a way that had nothing to do with danger. And her wrist cam was already recording, because she slept with it on, because she always slept with it on, because the frontier had taught her that the universe did not wait for you to be ready. The cub looked at her sleeve. It stood up on wobbly legs and tottered forward with the unsteady determination of something very young and very sure of what it wanted, and it pressed its face into the fabric of her sleeve and rubbed its muzzle back and forth in slow, deliberate strokes. And with each stroke, it repeated the sound, fer fer fer, fer fer fer. Its fur was impossibly soft against her skin, and it was warm, warmer than she expected, and the bioluminescent patterns in its fur coat shifted to something slow and steady and calm, like embers settling in a fire. And Maya felt something unlock in her chest that she did not have a word for. She laughed, very quietly, and reached out with her free hand and scratched gently behind the small armored plates that framed the cub's ears. And the cub's eyes closed halfway, and the fer 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 sound deepened into something that resonated through her fingertips and up her arm. That was when Tessic opened his door. The scream that came out of the Rilvani diplomat was not a sound that any human throat could have produced. A high-frequency distress trill that bounced off the stone walls and echoed through the entire guest compound like an alarm siren made of breaking glass. And Tessic's chitin plates flared outward in full threat display as he staggered backward and pointed all four of his trembling hands at Maya and the cub. "It is on you," he shrieked. "It is on you. It is tasting you. It is preparing to feed. Do not move. Do not breathe. I will summon." "Tessic, calm down. Derm!" Tessic screamed down the corridor. "Derm, the human is being consumed." The sound of Derm's door being torn from its frame was something Maya felt in her teeth. And then the Gorvathi was in the corridor, all 800 kilograms of him. His armored plates flared, and his four eyes wide, and his massive body positioned between Maya and the direction he assumed the threat was coming from, which was every direction, because Derm's species handled fear by preparing to fight the entire room. "Where?" Derm bellowed. "Where is the threat? I will end it." "The cub," Tessic wailed. "The cub has gone feral. It has escaped the nursery. It is attached to her arm. It is sitting in my lap," Maya said calmly, because at some point during the screaming she had simply sat down cross-legged on the corridor floor, and the cub had climbed into her lap and was now pressed against her stomach, with its face still buried in her sleeve, going fer fer fer, with absolutely no concern for the chaos happening around it. Derm stared at her with all four eyes. Tessic's distress trill had alerted every Kirathi guard in the compound, and within 90 seconds, the corridor was full of 7-foot bioluminescent predators in full combat readiness, their claws extended and their fur blazing with sharp aggressive patterns of red and white. And they formed a ring around Maya, with a precision that suggested they had trained for exactly this kind of scenario, which they probably had, because Kirathi cubs escaping the nursery was apparently a known tactical emergency. And then Matriarch Seaith arrived. She came around the corner like a force of nature, her ceremonial armor replaced by lightweight combat plating that hugged her massive frame. And her claws were fully extended, each one gleaming like a black blade, and her bioluminescence was flaring in a threat display so intense that Derm, a creature built like a siege engine, pressed himself flat against the wall and made a sound that on his world would have been a prayer. Seaith's copper eyes swept the corridor and found Maya on the floor and the cub in her lap. And she stopped so abruptly that the guards behind her nearly collided with her. The entire corridor went silent. The only sound was the cub. Fer fer fer, fer fer fer. It had not looked up once during any of this. Not during the screaming, not during the guards, not during the arrival of a war matriarch in full threat display, because it did not care about any of those things, because the only thing in its small, fierce world that mattered was the human whose sleeve smelled right and felt right and was right. Maya looked up at Seaith and realized she should probably be afraid, but she was not afraid, because the cub was warm and soft and its small body vibrated against hers with a trust so complete, so unguarded, that fear simply could not find a way in. "She came to me," Maya said quietly, and she did not know how she knew the cub was female, but she knew. I opened the door, and she was just here. Seith's claws retracted slowly, one by one, each one sliding back into its sheath, with a soft click that sounded very loud in the silence. And her bioluminescence shifted from aggressive red to something cooler and harder to read, and she stared at Maya and the cub for a long time without speaking. The guards looked at their matriarch and waited. Tessic had stopped making sounds entirely, and appeared to be calculating whether he could fit inside a wall panel. Derm was still pressed against the wall, breathing very carefully. Seith spoke one word in High Karathi, a word that came from deep in her chest, and carried a weight that made the air in the corridor feel thicker, and Maya's translator processed it for half a second longer than usual, before rendering it into a single English word that appeared on her wristcam display in small blue text. Impossible. Maya looked down at the cub, and the cub looked up at her, and its amber eyes were half closed and content. And its fur pulsed with that slow ember glow, and it pressed its face back into her sleeve and went fer 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 one more time, like it was saying something that did not need to be translated. Seith turned to her personal guard and said in a voice that allowed no question and no delay, "Bring me the footage from her device, and send for the Speaker of Lineages." The guard hesitated for just a fraction of a second, because the Speaker of Lineages had not left the inner sanctum in 40 years. And Seith looked at him with copper eyes that burned, and the guard left at a run. Maya sat on the cold stone floor with a purring alien predator in her lap, and her wristcam recording everything, and she thought to herself that this was either the most important moment of her career or the last moment of her career, and she was not entirely sure which one she was hoping for. The inner sanctum of Clan Seith was not a room, so much as it was a living thing. The walls breathed with bioluminescence that shifted in response to the emotions of every Kirathi present. And right now, those walls were a churning mess of color, deep troubled blues and sharp questioning golds, and underneath it all, a thread of something red and ancient that Maya did not have the training to read, but that made the hair on her arms stand up. She had been brought here under escort, which was a polite way of saying that 6 armed Kirathi guards had walked her through corridors that grew older and deeper with every turn, until the stone under her bare feet was smooth from 10,000 years of passage. The cub had walked beside her the entire way, pressed against her leg, its small body a warm, steady presence that never wavered. The Elder Council of Clan Seith sat in a curved formation on raised platforms that put their massive frames above Maya's head. Combined bioluminescence filled the chamber with a shifting aurora that would have been beautiful if it had not also felt like being examined by a dozen living searchlights. And in the center of them all sat a Kirathi so old that its fur had gone almost entirely white, threaded with faint silver light that pulsed slow and steady like a resting heartbeat. This was Oroth, Speaker of Lineages, and when Oroth looked at Maya with eyes that had faded from copper to pale gold, Maya understood that she was being seen by something that had watched the rise and fall of generations and did not impress easily. "Show me," Oroth said, and the voice was like dry wind through old branches. Seith gestured, and a guard activated a holographic display that expanded to fill the center of the chamber. And Maya's wristcam footage began to play in crisp, unedited detail, starting from the nursery gallery. Every elder in the room watched. The footage showed what Maya had already seen: the silver-blue cub tracking her movement across the gallery with dilated pupils and pulsing fur. And then it cut to the corridor, the cub at her door, the first Fer fer fer, the muzzle pressed into her sleeve. The slow shift of bioluminescent patterns from alert to calm, to something that Maya still could not name, but that looked like the visual equivalent of a sigh of relief. Verath watched the footage 3 times without speaking. On the third viewing, the old Kirathi leaned forward and paused the image on a single frame. The moment where the cub's fur had shifted to that deep, slow ember glow, while nestled against Maya's arm, and Verath made a sound that Maya's translator could not process, a low harmonic that seemed to come from multiple parts of the elder's body at once. "This pattern," Verath said, and one ancient claw extended to trace the light formations frozen in the hologram. "This has not been directed at a non-Kirathi in recorded memory." Walls shifted to deep blue, and Maya felt the weight of every elder's attention land on her like a physical thing. "The vocalization the cub made is not aggression," Verath continued, and the old eyes found Maya's, and held them with a steadiness that felt like being pinned to the floor. "It is not predatory fixation, and it is not distress, and it is not play." Verath spoke a word in High Kirathi that filled the chamber like a bell. "Kurathshe." Maya's translator worked for several seconds, cycling through approximations and failing to settle on any single rendering. And finally it offered a cluster of meanings that appeared on her wristcam display in small hesitant text, as if the software itself was unsure. "Chosen safe one, and beside it, the warmth I claim, and beside that simply, mine forever." "A Kirathi cub speaks Kurathshe once in its life," Verath said. "It speaks it toward one being and one being alone, and that being becomes the cub's guardian, and protector and anchor. The fixed point around which the cub's entire emotional and neurological development will organize itself for the rest of its natural life. And this bond, once spoken, cannot be unspoken." The chamber erupted. Elders spoke over each other in rapid High Kirathi that Maya's translator could barely keep up with, and the walls blazed with conflicting colors as the emotional temperature of the room spiked in every direction at once. And Maya caught fragments of translated argument, words like unprecedented and dangerous and what will the other clans say, and the humans are too young a species, and this cannot be genuine. And then Verath struck a claw against stone, and the sound rang through the room like a gunshot, and everyone went silent. "It is genuine," Verath said with a finality that closed every open mouth. "I have watched 10,000 bondings in my life, and I know what Kurathshe looks like, and this is Kurathshe, chosen. And the question now is not whether this is real, but what will be done about it." Tesek, standing pressed against the back wall of the chamber like he was trying to merge with the stone, raised one trembling hand and spoke in a voice that barely carried. "What are the diplomatic implications if the human respectfully declines?" "She cannot decline," said an elder to the left, and the sharpness of the statement made Tesek's hand drop instantly. Maya looked at Verath, and she asked the question that no one else in the room seemed willing to ask. And she asked it not because she was brave, but because the cub was sitting on her feet and leaning against her shin, and the warmth of its small body made everything else feel very far away. What happens to the cub if the bond is refused? The chamber went still in a way that was different from silence, deeper and heavier, and the bioluminescent walls dimmed to a color that Maya's translator flagged as grief hue. And Verath looked at her with those pale gold eyes, and for the first time the ancient face showed something that might have been surprise that a human would ask this question first, before any other. "The cub would enter grief decline," Verath said, and the words came slowly, as if each one carried weight that the elder did not want to set down carelessly. "The cub would stop eating within days, and its bioluminescence would dim and then go dark, and its body would follow what its bonding instinct tells it, which is that if the chosen one is gone, then there is nothing to organize around, nothing to grow toward, nothing to be. It would die, Maya said, and it was not a question. Within a season, Orath confirmed, Kirathi cubs are not like adults. They are not resilient. They are not adaptable. The bonding instinct is hardwired into their neurology at a level that predates language and culture and civilization itself, and rejection is not something their biology has any mechanism to survive, because in 10,000 years of recorded history, no Kuratshe bond has ever been refused. Maya looked down at the cub. The cub looked up at her. Its amber eyes were wide and trusting, and its fur pulsed with that slow, warm light, and it pressed its face into her leg and went fer fer fer, very softly, like it was reminding her of something she already knew. Maya thought about the briefing she had read, and the warnings she had been given, and the protocols she was supposed to follow, and the career she had built, and the diplomatic consequences that were already multiplying in the background, like a chain reaction she could not stop. And she thought about all of those things for about 2 seconds, before she stopped thinking about them entirely. She looked up at the Elder Council of Clan Seaith, 12 of the most powerful Kirathi alive, each one a predator capable of ending her with a single motion, and she spoke in a voice that was steady and clear and completely unafraid. Then I am not refusing. The chamber walls flared with light, a dozen colors at once, and Maya did not know what most of them meant, but she saw one color that her translator identified as recognition, and another that it identified as the feeling of a path becoming clear. And she decided that was enough. What she did not know, because she had not checked, and because in the chaos of the morning she had not thought to check, was that her wrist cam footage had already been uploaded to the survey vessel in orbit as part of her routine data transmission, and the ship's AI had flagged it as culturally significant. And it had been forwarded to UESS Diplomatic Command, and within 6 hours it would be the most watched recording in the history of the Galactic Compact. Within 12 hours, everything would be different. But right now, in this ancient chamber under a ceiling of living light, Maya sat down on their stone floor and pulled the cub into her lap, and the cub went fer 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 against her sleeve, and the sound echoed off walls that had heard 10,000 years of history, and had never heard anything quite like this. The footage hit the Galactic Communication Networks at 34:47 station time on a quiet news day when nothing else was happening, and within an hour, it was the only thing anyone in the known galaxy was talking about. It started with a Rilvani science aggregator that picked up the clip from a UESS diplomatic feed and reposted it with the caption, "Human triggers Kuratshe bond with Kirathi cub. Footage confirmed authentic." And from there, it moved at a speed that made light seem patient. The video was 3 minutes and 42 seconds long. It showed a human woman in a plain gray sleep shirt opening a door and finding a Kirathi cub sitting in a corridor, and the cub looking up at her with enormous amber eyes and saying, "Fer fer fer," in a voice so small and so sincere that it bypassed every cultural barrier and every species-specific communication filter, and went directly to whatever part of any brain in any body was responsible for the feeling of something soft and helpless, choosing to trust you. It showed the woman sitting down on a cold stone floor, without hesitation, and the cub climbing into her lap and pressing its face into her sleeve. And it showed her laughing quietly and scratching behind its ear plates, while its fur shifted to a slow, warm glow that every Kirathi watching recognized instantly as the deepest form of contentment their species could express. It showed a human being chosen by the child of the most feared species in the galaxy, and responding not with fear or calculation or diplomatic caution, but with the pure automatic warmth of someone who saw something small and alive and loved it without thinking. The galaxy lost its collective mind. On the Rilvani homeworld, the consensus convened an emergency scientific session to analyze how this had happened, because it should not have happened, because humans had no bioluminescent signaling and no compatible pheromone profile, and no evolutionary history with the Vani Karathi, and no biological mechanism that should have been able to trigger a Karath-She bond in any living creature. Their leading researcher, a xenobiologist named Verath, who had spent 40 years studying interspecies bonding mechanics, watched the footage 11 times, and then published a preliminary finding that spread across the academic networks like wildfire. The finding was this: the bond had been triggered not by biology, but by emotion. Karathi cubs were exquisitely sensitive to the emotional states of the beings around them, reading micro-expressions and body temperature and subtle chemical signals with a precision that bordered on telepathic. And every species that had ever encountered the Karathi had radiated the same emotional signature in their presence, which was fear. Deep, primal evolutionary fear of a predator that was bigger and faster and deadlier than anything they had ever faced. Every species, except humans, and felt awe and fascination, and sometimes nervousness, but not the bone-deep survival terror that every other species carried. And humans looked at Karathi cubs and felt something that Verath could only describe in her paper as an irrational and apparently involuntary desire to nurture and protect, consistent with the human species' documented tendency to form caregiving bonds with any organism they perceive as small and endearing, regardless of its actual threat level. Or as one human commentator put it when the paper was shared on human social media, "We saw a 7-foot venomous apex predator's baby, and our entire species went, 'Aw, cute, must hold.'" Human social media had already become a place of complete beautiful chaos. The hashtag Fer 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 was trending on every platform, in every language, on every human world and colony and station, and people were crying and laughing and sharing the clip with notes that said, "I would die for this cub," and "This is the most human thing that has ever happened in space." And someone had already made a plush toy version of the cub that said "Fer fer fer" when you squeezed it, and it sold out in 9 minutes. On Verath Prime, the reaction was more complex and more profound. Matriarch Seaith had spent 2 days managing the political fallout within the Karathi clans, because rival clans saw the bonding as either a sign of weakness or a sign of something they did not want to name. And the arguments raged through the clan communication networks with a ferocity that matched any territorial dispute in living memory. And then something happened that no one had predicted. Karathi cubs on other worlds, in other clan holds, watched the footage on screens and displays, and they recognized what they were seeing, because Karath-She was not a cultural construct, but a neurological reality wired into every Karathi at birth. And they began making excited sounds, small chirps and trills, and in some cases, their own tiny fur sounds, because the footage was real, and they knew it was real the way that only the very young can know something is real, with a certainty that has not yet learned to doubt itself. The elders who had been arguing went quiet. You could dispute politics, and you could question diplomacy, but you could not argue with your own children, recognizing the truth. On the 7th day, Maya underwent the rite of claiming. She stood in the central chamber of Clan Seaith's ancestral hold, while Orath painted her skin with bioluminescent pigments that glowed against her brown skin in patterns that meant guardian and chosen and keeper of the small light, and the pigments tingled and warmed as they bonded to her skin, and she was told they would never fully fade. She was given a clan name spoken in High Karathi by Seaith herself, Maya, who was chosen, and the name was entered into the lineage record alongside the cub's name and bloodline, as if Maya had always been part of the family, as if the only thing that had been missing was her arrival. She was presented with ceremonial armor sized for a human frame, lighter than Karathi armor, but inscribed with the same clan markings. And when she put it on, the cub, whose name she now knew was Kethi, pressed against her armored leg, and went fer fer fer, and the entire assembly hall filled with a bioluminescent pulse of warm gold that Maya's translator rendered simply as joy. Afterward, in a quiet corridor far from the crowds, Seaith walked beside Maya, and Kethy trotted between them, and the great matriarch was silent for a long time before she spoke. "I want to tell you something," Seaith said, and her voice was different now, stripped of ceremony and rank and authority, just a voice, deep and tired and honest, something that I would not say where others could hear. "Tell me," Maya said. "We have spent 10,000 years being feared," Seaith said, and she looked down at Kethy and then out at the bioluminescent forest that stretched beyond the hold's walls, glowing in the eternal twilight of Verath Prime. "Every species we have met has looked at us and seen death, and we have been respected and deferred to and given wide passage through every corridor and every negotiation and every trade deal. And we have never once in 10,000 years been looked at the way you looked at that cub." "How did I look at her?" Maya asked. Seaith stopped walking, and her copper eyes found Maya's and held them. "Like she was yours," Seaith said. "Like she was yours before she even chose you. Like looking at her and loving her was the easiest and most natural thing you had ever done. And my people have conquered worlds, and we have bent the compact to our will, and we have done everything except the one thing your species did without trying." "What is that?" Maya asked. "Made us feel safe," Seaith said, and her bioluminescence flickered once with a mass. Color Maya had never seen before. Something soft and unguarded and raw. And then it was gone, and the matriarch straightened and was herself again. That night, Maya received a priority communication from UESS Diplomatic Command that outlined a proposal for a joint human-Karathi cultural integration program, the first of its kind, a direct result of what the message called the Vasquez incident, which made Maya laugh out loud because she had just been sitting on a floor. They wanted her to lead it. But at the bottom of the message, there was a note flagged with a diplomatic warning marker, and the note said that 3 species had filed formal objections to the program with the Compact Assembly, and the objections had been filed simultaneously, which meant coordination, which meant this was not a bureaucratic complaint. It was a political move, and it was aimed directly at her. The Compact Assembly Hall on Neutral Station Helix 9 was designed to make every species feel equally small. A vast circular chamber with seating that rose in tiers toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. And the delegations of 47 species filled those tiers like a living mosaic of every shape and color and form of intelligence the galaxy had produced. Maya stood at the center of the chamber floor in a space that was meant to make the person standing in it feel exposed and alone. And she was not alone, because Kethy was with her. Kethy had grown in 3 weeks, noticeably larger now, her silver-blue fur thicker, and her paws less clumsy, and her amber eyes sharper. And she rode on Maya's shoulders, with her tail wrapped around Maya's arm, and her head resting against Maya's neck. And when they walked into the assembly together, the chamber went so silent that Maya could hear the hum of the station's life support systems through the walls. Species watched a Karathi cub nuzzle a human's neck, and the silence was the sound of every assumption in the room being rearranged. The objecting species sat together in a block on the upper tiers. The Drelkathi hegemony, with their scaled bodies and cold territorial eyes. The Paleshi observers, wrapped in their sensor cloaks and radiating suspicion like a frequency. And a faction of the Rilvani consensus, led by academics who had decided that what they could not explain must therefore be dangerous. Their representative spoke first, a Drelkathi ambassador named Korthov, whose voice was flat and precise, and carried the particular confidence of someone who had decided the outcome before the debate began. "The assembly is presented with a biological security concern," Korthov said. "A human has triggered a Kurath-She bond in a Karathi cub through no deliberate action and with no biological mechanism that can be identified or controlled. And this raises a fundamental question about the safety of allowing a species with this kind of unpredictable emotional influence to deepen its relationship with the most militarily powerful species in the compact. Korthov paused and looked directly at Maya. If humans can accidentally trigger the deepest bonding instinct of the Karathi, what else might they accidentally trigger? And what happens when that accident is not so benign? Murmurs ran through the tiers, and Maya felt the weight of 47 species' attention pressing down on her. And Kethy shifted on her shoulders and made a small questioning sound. And Maya reached up and scratched behind her ear plates without thinking, and Kethy settled. The human species is emotionally volatile, Korthov continued. They bond indiscriminately with organisms that could kill them. They show no appropriate fear response to apex predators, and they routinely prioritize emotional impulse over rational assessment of risk. And we submit that these traits, which may seem endearing in a viral video, represent a genuine destabilizing influence when applied to interspecies relations at the highest level. The Peleshi representative added in a whisper that the chamber's acoustics carried to every seat. We cannot control what humans make others feel, and what cannot be controlled cannot be trusted. The Rilvani faction leader, a scientist named Queth, spoke last, and spoke carefully. Our analysis suggests that the bond may represent a form of unintentional neurological manipulation by the human, not malicious, but not voluntary either, and a phenomenon that cannot be explained or replicated should not be the foundation of a new diplomatic framework. They were done, and the chamber waited, and Maya looked at the 3 delegations that had come here to argue that being loved by a human was a security threat, and she felt something settle inside her, like a stone finding the bottom of a river. Assembly chair, a massive Gorvathi, who made Durm look small, gestured for her to proceed. Maya did not give a speech because she was not a politician and she was not a diplomat in any real sense, and the only thing she had ever been good at was paying attention and telling the truth about what she saw. I would like to show the assembly what actually happened, she said, and she activated her wristcam's holographic projection, and the footage expanded to fill the center of the chamber in full immersive detail. It started in the nursery gallery, with a small cub pressing against a barrier and looking up at a human who smiled without thinking. And it continued through the corridor, where that cub appeared at a door and said, "Fer fer fer," for the first time. And it showed everything that followed, unedited, unnarrated, just a woman and a cub, and the simple, honest accumulation of moments that added up to something that did not need to be explained. Itself. The assembly watched in silence. When the footage ended, Maya let the hologram fade, and she looked at Korthov, and at the Peleshi, and at Queth, and she spoke in a voice that was calm and clear, and carried no anger, because anger was not what she felt. You are not afraid of what humans might do to the Karathi, she said. You are afraid of what happens to your power structures when the most feared species in the galaxy has a reason to like us. The silence that followed was absolute. Korthov's scales rippled, but no words came, and Queth's antennae flattened against her head, and the Peleshi representative's sensor cloak flickered as if the being inside it had flinched. And then the Karathi delegation stood, all of them at once in a single fluid motion that made the tears around them go very still, because when Karathi stood up together it meant something, and everyone in the galaxy knew what it meant. And she was wearing full war regalia, the ancient ceremonial armor of Clan Seaith that had not been worn in the assembly in living memory. And her bioluminescence was blazing in patterns that Maya's translator could not keep up with, cycling through colors that meant defiance and pride and protection and something older and deeper that had no translation at all. Seaith had not spoken in the compact assembly in 10 years. She spoke now, 4 words in High Karathi, delivered in a voice that resonated through the chamber like a struck bell, and made the walls vibrate, and made several delegates on the lower tiers physically lean back in their seats. Maya's translator rendered them in small, steady text on her wristcam display. The cub has spoken. In Karathi law, a Karath-Shay bond was inviolable, sacred beyond politics and beyond diplomacy and beyond the authority of any body in the galaxy, because it was not a decision made by adults or governments or assemblies. It was a decision made by a child's heart, and in Karathi culture there was nothing in the universe more honest than that. To challenge a Karath-Shay bond was to challenge the Karathi species itself, and as the delegations in the chamber looked at the row of standing Karathi with their blazing fur and their copper eyes and their quiet, absolute certainty, the mathematics of the situation became very clear very quickly. The three objecting factions had not just picked a fight with one human woman who sat on floors and smiled at things that could kill her. They had picked a fight with the entire Karathi species, who were now publicly and fiercely protective of their human, because their cub had chosen her. And if the cub said she was family, then she was family, and there was not a force in the known galaxy that would be permitted to say otherwise. Korthav withdrew the Drelkathi objection before the echo of Seith's words had faded. Within seconds, Queth took slightly longer, but the Rilvani scientist looked at the footage still lingering in the chamber's memory banks, and looked at the cub on Maya's shoulders, and looked at the standing wall of Karathi fury, and said quietly, "The Rilvani consensus withdraws its objection and requests inclusion in the Cultural Integration Program as an observer." The assembly approved the program unanimously. Afterward, there were ceremonies and formal statements and diplomatic handshakes that took hours. But Maya moved through all of it in a kind of warm daze, with Kethi on her shoulders making small, contented sounds, and Tessic following behind her, clicking with what she had learned to recognize as stunned admiration, and Durm telling anyone who would listen that he had always known humans were remarkable, and that he had not actually been afraid in that corridor, and everyone should please stop sharing that particular piece of security footage. 3 days later, Maya sat on a balcony of the Clan Seaith hold, overlooking the bioluminescent forests of Verath Prime. The trees pulsed with slow waves of color that rolled through the canopy like breathing, greens and blues and purples that shifted with the wind, and the sky above was a deep violet scattered with unfamiliar stars. And the air was warm and sweet and electric the way it had been on the first day when she stepped off the shuttle and fell in love with this world without meaning to. Kethi was sprawled across her lap. The cub was much too big for this now, her legs hanging off one side and her tail dragging on the ground. But she had arranged herself with the determined stubbornness of a creature that refused to acknowledge the passage of time or the limitations of spatial geometry. And her head was resting on Maya's arm, and her fur pulsed in that slow ember glow that meant she was happy, simply and completely happy. Maya looked down at her, and Kethi looked up, half-closed amber eyes, and pressed her face into the sleeve of Maya's jacket. The same sleeve, always the same sleeve, and made the sound that had changed everything. Fer fer fer. Maya smiled. Her wristcam was still recording because it was always recording, because the most important moments were the ones you did not see coming. And this moment was not important because it would be watched by billions, or because it had reshaped galactic politics, or because it had proven something about humanity that humanity had always known about itself but had never been able to explain. It was important because a cub had chosen her, and she had chosen the cub back. And that was enough. It had always been enough. On her wristcam display a small notification blinked, telling her that the recording had been saved, and below it, in small blue text, her translator displayed the last fragment of High Karathi that Kethi's fer 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 most closely approximated. The software had finally settled on after weeks of analysis and refinement. It said simply, "You are my home." Maya closed her eyes and leaned back, and let the light of an alien forest wash over her, and the cub purred in her lap, and the wristcam recorded the stars. She did not need a translation. She had understood from the beginning.